I'm Elliot Peters, and this is What Was That About?, a show that tries to get to the point of every movie. This week we're talking about a fantasy classic and perhaps the most quotable movie of all time. It's The Princess Bride. You can expect a quick plot refresher, a couple deep dives, a tangent or two, and at the end we'll decide once and for all, what was that about? All that and more after this quick intro. Welcome back to the show, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm very, very excited to be talking about The Princess Bride today. This is, of course, one of my favorite movies. It's one of, I think, everybody's favorite movies. Once you've seen it, it is immediately slotted into that list. I remember I first saw this movie as a little boy, and for reasons we'll get into, I think it is such an important movie for little boys in particular to see. I loved it straight away. The adventure, the romance, and those timeless characters. It's the kind of movie that sticks in your imagination and becomes a part of your personality without you even realizing it. And once you've seen The Princess Bride, you start to see so many references to it everywhere. It really is a good contender for the most quoted movie of all time. There's so many bangers, line after line after line. And it feels like every scene has at least one moment that has cemented itself into pop culture permanently. The Princess Bride came out in 1987. It was directed by Rob Reiner, written by William Goldman. Cinematography by Adrian Biddle. Its cast contains Cary Elwes, Mandy Patinkin, Chris Sarandon, Christopher Guest, Wallace Shawn, Andre the Giant, Robin Wright, Peter Falk, and Billy Crystal. It was edited by Robert Leighton, with music by Mark Knopfler. Why I chose this movie for the podcast is a bit of a no-brainer. The Princess Bride remains beloved by generations. My parents love it, my grandparents love it, my children are going to love it too. I've been meaning to revisit it since the tragic passing of director Rob Reiner late last year. Mr. Reiner delivered some really timeless and incredible classics that I think a lot of us took for granted while he was alive. But since his passing, there has been a lot of scrutiny placed on his filmography, and people have come to realize just how much of a gift his filmography is. In the 80s and 90s in particular, he went on this generational run of just insanely memorable movies. An underrated favorite of mine is Misery. I absolutely love Misery, and that is a huge departure from the type of movie that he made with Princess Bride. That's really indicative of the sheer scope and level of diversity that Rob Reiner was able to accomplish in his work. A true artist. As I've previously mentioned, it is the most quotable movie ever. I struggle to think of any movie that compares. Princess Bride has one of the greatest screenplays of all time, from legendary screenwriter William Goldman, and it remains an inspiration for me as a writer as well. Relatedly, because of that rich screenplay, Princess Bride is ripe for thematic discussion, which is exactly what we do here on this show. Since it can be described as a deconstruction of the fantasy and swashbuckler genres, it's a brilliant satire that beautifully delivers on the same tropes that it pokes fun at. You'll never find a movie more silly and sincere in the same breath. I'm already gushing, but what do I love about this movie? I personally love adventure films, particularly films that take after the classic swashbucklers. Errol Flynn's Robin Hood, Douglas Fairbanks' Silence, Zorro, etc. And so the sandbox in which Princess Bride plays is one that I'm very fond of. The characters of Princess Bride are insanely memorable. Fezzik, Humperdinck, Miracle Max, Inigo Montoya, and of course, Buttercup and Wesley. And structurally, it's a brilliant movie. This film has one of my favorite climaxes in all of cinema. The duel between Inigo Montoya and the six-fingered man, Count Rugen, is, I think, one of the greatest scenes ever put to film. It's emotional, cathartic, earnest, and deceptively simple in terms of construction. I think about this scene in particular at least once a month. But what was it about? On paper, a sick little boy gets a visit from his doting grandfather, who tells him the story of the Princess Bride. In the tale, a young woman named Buttercup falls in love with her farmhand Wesley. Following some adventures at sea, during which he is presumed dead, Wesley returns to the kingdom to discover that Buttercup is now trapped in a loveless engagement to the insipid Prince Humperdinck, and being held against her will by a charming band of rogues. Wesley and Buttercup must find their way back to each other, while the rogues, including the gentle giant Fezzik and the charismatic Inigo Montoya, find redemption and friendship. A confrontation on the night of Buttercup's wedding results in a happy ending for all. Beneath the surface, this is one of the greatest love stories ever told. which has a gentle spirit even as it parades about a raucous adventure and a devilish sense of humor. The Princess Bride has some insightful and powerful things to say about the nature of love, how we express it, and the lengths we'll go to attain it. We're going to look at 4 different themes today, and I'll read excerpts from the screenplay. We'll discuss, and then at the end we'll try to decide which theme best maps onto the film as a whole. On that note, we'll begin with Theme 1, Acts of Service as an Expression of Love. Let's first look at the way that the film might define this theme in its own words. The film opens with the grandfather gifting his grandson a book. A book? That's right. When I was your age, television was called books, and this is a special book. It was the book my father used to read to me when I was sick, and I used to read it to your father. Today I'm going to read it to you. Does it got any sports in it? Are you kidding? Fencing, fighting, torture, revenge, giants, monsters, chases, escapes, true love, miracles. That doesn't sound too bad. I'll try and stay awake. Oh, thank you very much. That's very nice of you. Your vote of confidence is overwhelming. All right. The Princess Bride by S. Morgenstern. Chapter 1. Buttercup was raised on a small farm in the country of Florin. Her favorite pastimes were riding her horse and tormenting the farm boy that worked there. His name was Wesley, but she never called him that. Isn't that a wonderful beginning? Yeah, it's really good. Nothing gave Buttercup as much pleasure as ordering Wesley around. Farm boy, polish my horse's saddle. I want to see my face shining in it by morning. As you wish. As you wish was all he ever said to her. Farm boy, fill these with water, please. As you wish. That day she was amazed to discover that when he was saying, as you wish, what he meant was, I love you. Even more amazing was the day she realized she truly loved him back. Farm boy, fetch me that pitcher. As you wish. The film cuts to the pair kissing in the sunset, and the grandson halts the story. He says, hold it. What is this? You trying to trick me? Where's the sports? Is this a kissing book? And this touches on something really, really interesting about The Princess Bride that I want to talk about. Masculinity factors fascinatingly into this theme, I think. The grandfather says that the story was passed down to him by his father and his grandfather before him. This is a tale of true love, which is being passed down through a male lineage. The film was written by a man and directed by a man, and I think that's a beautiful thing. It casts this image of love as an expression of providing, which in a literary sense is a traditionally masculine trait. A brief side note, it is common in literary criticism to assign or describe traits as being masculine or feminine, not necessarily because they only apply to men or women, but because they embody certain societal assumptions about gender, which can then be subverted or explored. In this case, I think there's more exploration than subversion happening, but it's worth noting and cannot be discounted in this case. As evidenced by the grandfather's narration, Wesley's primary expression of love, which is born out of his societal station as a farmhand, is through acts of service. Complete and total devotion. His journey at sea is likewise done in service to Buttercup. Because like other romantic leads, say Heathcliff or D'Artagnan, he must go and seek his fortune in an attempt to earn Buttercup's hand by way of improving his social standing. I think because this is so earnestly and openly conveyed in the film's opening minutes, we are invited to apply this kind of logic to other areas of the story as well. For instance, I believe that Inigo Montoya's entire quest may be seen as one big act of service to his father. In this way, avenging his father's death can be described as a profound expression of love. Again, this time, man to man. In much the same way, in the film's closing moments, the grandfather says, as you wish, to his grandson. It is the movie's final line, embodying this theme and demonstrating that to love someone is to devote yourself to them, and to make their needs your needs. Theme 2 that we're going to talk about, I would categorize as an individual's agency over their own life. This theme particularly pertains to Princess Buttercup. In fact, I might even describe it as the central theme of her character arc. But it has larger implications for the story as a whole, and what the movie is trying to say about love. To explore this theme, we're going to jump towards the end of the film, where Princess Buttercup and Prince Humperdinck have been wed, and Wesley has snuck into her bedchamber following their marriage. Buttercup says, "Wesley, will you ever forgive me?" Wesley says, "What hideous sin have you committed lately?" Buttercup says, "I got married. I didn't want to. It all happened so fast." Wesley says, "It never happened." Buttercup says, "What?" And Wesley says, "It never happened." Buttercup retorts, "But it did. I was there. This old man said man and wife." Wesley says, "Did you say I do?" And Buttercup says, "We sort of skipped that part." Wesley provides, "Then you're not married. If you didn't say it, you didn't do it." Throughout the movie, Buttercup attempts to find different ways to maintain her agency, despite being kidnapped and forced to marry, and in most cases, she, as a character and as an individual, defers that agency outside of herself to the man that she believes will save her, Wesley. This seems outwardly like a very typical fairy tale, in which the love interest of the hero is held prisoner, robbed of her freedom, forced to become a helpless MacGuffin for which the hero hunts, a prize to be won. Buttercup actively resists this typecasting. She threatens suicide as a means of escape, but all along she allows herself to believe that there are a number of things completely beyond her capability as an individual. In the end, what Wesley points out to her here in this scene is that she had that agency inside of herself all along. It's not something anyone could give her or take away from her. If you didn't say it, you didn't do it. Which is incredibly simple advice when phrased like that, but it's a powerful idea. Buttercup spends the whole second half of the movie thinking that the wedding can only be canceled if one of two things happens. Either she dies or Wesley saves her. And in the end, she's the one that was in control of her destiny. And through inaction, no less, which I think is fascinating. Buttercup is not the only character that this applies to. Wesley, by going away in the beginning, is taking action to reclaim agency over his life as well. The film also makes a very, very big deal of skill and study and the apprehension of knowledge and application of knowledge. For instance, Inigo Montoya shares a duel with the Six-Fingered Man in his childhood, or his adolescence, which he loses, and he then dedicates the rest of his life to trying to hunt him down, but he also devotes all of his time to mastering the sword, something that Wesley does as well, and they then get to compare their skills. But that type of agency, of taking control of your time and your individuality and your destiny, is something that most of the characters do. Vizzini as well, and we'll talk about this in a moment. Vizzini, played by Wallace Shawn, prides himself on his intellect and talks about intellect as if it is something apprehended over years of study, as opposed to, someone simply being born very smart. He thinks of himself and regards Wesley as someone who has studied a lot in order to achieve the level of intellect that he has. So skill, the learning of skill, the application of skill are all things that The Princess Bride definitely concerns itself with, and I think that ties directly into this idea of agency as we see it in the film. The third theme that we're going to talk about is hubris. Hubris is a very classical theme. It is, I think, an invention of Greek tragedy, as in the classical works of ancient Greece. So, as a theme, it's been around for a long time. And hubris is, I believe, the undoing of nearly every single one of The Princess Bride's antagonists. In literature, hubris is best described as an excessive self-confidence, pride, particularly when it leads to a failure or self-destruction. It is one of the most iconic fatal flaws. We'll take a look at a minor antagonist, who also happens to be one of the most memorable ones now. Wesley, while disguised as the Man in Black, has defeated both Inigo Montoya and Fezzik the Giant, and he comes upon the kidnapper, Vizzini, seated at a low table, with Buttercup blindfolded beside him. Vizzini, seeing Wesley, says, "So, it is down to you, and it is down to me." It's going to be very difficult for me to read these lines without, in some way, mimicking Wallace Shawn's inflection. It is so, so memorable, and he's so great as this character. The man in black continues his approach. Vizzini puts a knife to Buttercup's neck and says, "If you wish her dead, by all means, keep moving forward." The man in black says, "Let me explain." Vizzini goes, "There's nothing to explain. You're trying to kidnap what I've rightfully stolen." The man in black says, "Perhaps an arrangement can be reached." Vizzini says, "There will be no arrangement, and you're killing her." The man in black says, "If there can be no arrangement, then we are at an impasse." Vizzini provides, "I'm afraid so. I can't compete with you physically, and you're no match for my brains." The man in black says, "You're that smart?" Vizzini says, "Let me put it this way. Have you ever heard of Plato, Aristotle, Socrates?" The man in black says, "Yes," and Vizzini says, "Morons." The man in black goes, "Really? In that case, I challenge you to a battle of wits." Vizzini says, "For the princess? To the death? I accept." The man in black says, "Good, then pour the wine." He provides a vial, going, "Inhale this, but do not touch." Vizzini inhales. "I smell nothing." Wesley says, "What you do not smell is called iocane powder. It is odorless, tasteless, dissolves instantly in liquid, and is among the more deadly poisons known to man." He covers the goblets and pours the iocane discreetly. The man in black says, "All right, where is the poison?" "The battle of wits has begun. It ends when you decide, and we both drink, and find out who is right and who is dead." Then Vizzini launches into this little speech. "But it's so simple. All I have to do is divine from what I know of you. Are you the sort of man who would put the poison into his own goblet or his enemy's? A clever man would put the poison into his own goblet, because he would know that only a great fool would reach for what he is given. I am not a great fool, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of you. But you must have known I was not a great fool. You would have counted on it, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of me." The man in black says, "You've made your decision, then?" And Vizzini continues, "Not remotely, because iocane comes from Australia, as everyone knows, and Australia is entirely peopled with criminals, and criminals are used to having people not trust them, as you are not trusted by me, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of you." The man in black says, "Truly, you have a dizzying intellect." Vizzini goes on, "Wait till I get going. Where was I?" The man in black provides Australia, and Vizzini says, "Yes, Australia. You must have suspected I would have known the powder's origin, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of me." The man in black says, "You're just stalling now." Vizzini continues, "You'd like to think that, wouldn't you? You've beaten my giant, which means you're exceptionally strong, so you could have put the poison in your own goblet, trusting on your strength to save you, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of you. But you've also bested my Spaniard, which means you must have studied, and in studying, you must have learned that man is mortal, so you would have put the poison as far from yourself as possible, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of me." The man in black says, "You're trying to trick me into giving something away. It won't work." Vizzini says, "It has worked. You've given everything away. I know where the poison is." The man in black says, "Then make your choice." Vizzini says, "I will, and I choose..." "What in the world can that be?" The man in black turns towards where he has pointed and says, "What? Where? I don't see anything." Vizzini has switched the goblets while Wesley is looking away and says, "I could have sworn I saw something. No matter." Then he starts laughing. The man in black says, "What's so funny?" Vizzini says, "I'll tell you in a minute. First, let's drink. Me from my glass and you from yours." They grab their glasses and carefully lift them up to their mouths before drinking. Then they set them back down on the table. Wesley says, "You guessed wrong." Vizzini says, "You only think I guessed wrong. That's what's so funny. I switched glasses when your back was turned. You fool! You fell victim to one of the classic blunders. The most famous is, never get involved in a land war in Asia. But only slightly less well known is this, never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line." From there he laughs until he stops and falls dead. Vizzini is undone by his faulty sense of his own intelligence. His hubris is an inflated belief in the superiority of his own thinking, which ironically causes him to overthink the situation. The six-fingered man, similarly, also succumbs to pride. He taunts Inigo Montoya throughout their duel. He delivers this cruel, cruel line just as Inigo Montoya is at his lowest point. "You must be that little Spanish brat I taught a lesson to all those years ago. Simply incredible. Have you been chasing me your whole life, only to fail now? I think that's the worst thing I've ever heard. How marvelous." Ultimately, he is reduced to an absolute coward in his final moments. Humperdinck suffers from a similar kind of pride. He believes, in his own words, that he can never be wrong. He says, when he is on the trail of Wesley and Buttercup, "They've disappeared. He must have seen us closing in, which might account for his panicking into error. Unless I'm wrong, and I'm never wrong, they are headed dead into the fire swamp." This becomes very funny when Wesley, upon confronting Humperdinck at the very end of the story, gets to correct him. I'll read the section here, since it's a wonderful and very clever piece of writing. This immediately follows that revelation about the wedding that we read earlier. Humperdinck says, "To the death." And Wesley says, "No, to the pain." Humperdinck says, "I don't think I'm quite familiar with that phrase." Wesley explains, "I'll explain, and I'll use small words so that you'll be sure to understand, you warthog-faced buffoon." Humperdinck says, "That may be the first time in my life a man has dared insult me." Wesley goes on, "It won't be the last. To the pain means the first thing you will lose will be your feet below the ankles, then your hands at the wrists, next your nose." Humperdinck says, "And then my tongue, I suppose. I killed you too quickly the last time, a mistake I don't mean to duplicate tonight." Wesley says, "I wasn't finished. The next thing you lose will be your left eye, then your right." Humperdinck cuts in, "And then my ears, I understand, let's get on with it." And Wesley says, "Wrong. Your ears you keep, and I'll tell you why. So that every shriek of every child at seeing your hideousness will be yours to cherish. Every babe that weeps at your approach, every woman who cries out, 'Dear God, what is that thing?' will echo in your perfect ears. That is what 'to the pain' means. It means I leave you in anguish, wallowing in freakish misery forever." Humperdinck says, "I think you're bluffing." Wesley says, "It's possible, pig. I might be bluffing. It's conceivable, you miserable, vomitous mass. I'm only lying here because I lack the strength to stand. Then again, perhaps I have the strength after all." And drawing on what strength he's thus far recovered, Wesley gets up and points his sword at Humperdinck. It says, "Drop your sword." It's this triumphant final moment, confrontation between the hero and the villain. But it's at that moment when Wesley says, "Wrong, your ears you'll keep," that we get the payoff of that earlier line, "I'm never wrong." And more so than that, throughout the rest of that scene, he simply continues to upend everything that Humperdinck says. The fourth and final theme that we're going to talk about here is the importance of stories. And the story of The Princess Bride is, of course, a story within a story. And now I've already said story so many times that it's starting not to sound like a word. But then there are also even smaller stories within that story where characters tell each other about their lives. For instance, Inigo Montoya recounting the tale of the Six-Fingered Man on the Cliffs of Insanity, which I love that that's what that place is called, by the way. But let's look at another scene. Soon after Buttercup is reclaimed by Humperdinck after her adventure in the fire swamp, she falls asleep and has a dream. The grandfather says, "The king died that very night, and before the following dawn, Buttercup and Humperdinck were married, and at noon she met her subjects again, this time as their queen." Humperdinck says, "My father's final words were," and the grandson cuts into the story and says, Hold it. Grandpa, you read that wrong. She doesn't marry Humperdinck. She marries Wesley, I'm sure of it. After all that Wesley did for her, if she didn't marry him, it wouldn't be fair." And here we're beginning to see the grandson come around to the story that he initially blanches at and pretends to be disinterested in, because it doesn't embody certain elements of his own idea of masculinity and fledgling adolescent masculinity. The grandfather says, "Who says life is fair? Where is that written? Life isn't always fair." The grandson says, "I'm telling you, you're messing up the story. Now get it right." Grandfather says, "Do you want me to go on with this?" And the grandson says, "Yes." The grandfather goes, "All right then, no more interruptions. At noon she met her subjects again, this time as their queen." He goes on to describe the dream, the nightmare. There's the person in the crowd who boos her and speaks all of her greatest fears into being. And then Buttercup wakes up. The grandfather says it was 10 days till the wedding. The king still lived, but Buttercup's nightmares were growing steadily worse. And the grandson says, "See, didn't I say she'd never marry that rotten Humperdinck?" Grandfather says, "Yes, you're very smart. Shut up." But so throughout the film, the frame narrative interweaves the grandfather-grandson storyline into the fantasy, providing a story about a little boy coming out of his shell. But more so than that, it has something worthwhile to say about the act of storytelling. how it's not a solitary act of godlike creation, it's a communion with the audience. I think it's a wonderful use of frame narrative, especially given that I personally don't usually like these types of narrative devices. Frame narratives too often, in my opinion, are used as morality lenses, providing clean-cut, external interpretations of the internal story. But The Princess Bride, true to form, 1 foot in satire, 1 foot in sincerity, uses its frame narrative to further complicate the morality of its story, drawing lines between right and wrong and then interrogating them instead of enforcing them. I also think it's interesting that The Princess Bride rewards certain types of justice that I think other films might shy away from. Wesley's threats to Humperdinck at the end of the film are intense and gruesome, yet the movie treats it like the comeuppance that Humperdinck deserves. There are plenty of stories out there about how revenge is not justice, or how a devotion to revenge is self-destructive, which I might agree with under other contexts. Yet Inigo Montoya's storyline is one of explicit revenge, and it is seen as heroic and justified. Princess Bride has an old-fashioned sense of righteousness to its violence that I honestly admire. So, what was it about? Let's talk about these themes again. We have acts of service as an expression of love. This applies to both the frame narrative and the story within the story. It connects to multiple characters, and it seems to me to be the thesis statement that the film hinges on whenever it's talking about love in general, and it is a love story. Then you've got agency over one's life. This is deeply, deeply connected to Buttercup and to many other characters, including Inigo Montoya and Wesley. And I think that there are certain lessons that can be learned from watching the movie and interrogating those ideas and trying to apply them to your own life. You are the master of your own destiny type thing. And then there's hubris. This, I think, really only applies to the antagonists, of which there are a handful in The Princess Bride. But it is one of those timeless themes that I think is so continuously prevalent and shows up in stories from the ancient Greeks all the way to today. We're still talking about these ideas and bandying them about and interpreting them in different ways. And for that reason, I think that it's really important that The Princess Bride has some element of that timelessness to it. And then there is the importance of stories as this mainly frame narrative type theme that keeps coming up time and again. As I previously mentioned, it sort of exists within the story. You know, I could kind of map it onto Inigo Montoya's tale as he tells it to Wesley. But really, it has more to do with the grandfather and the grandson. But because of that, I think we have to weigh the importance of the frame narrative. It is the opening and closing of the film. It is really where I think a lot of the heart lives. And so for that reason, even though it might not get as much screen time as some of the other themes, it carries a lot of weight. So if you were to ask me, what was that about? I would say the importance of stories, finding an audience, talking with them, honestly, emotionally, and sharing stories with people that you love. Thank you so much for being here. Feel free to rate the show wherever you're listening. I read all of the reviews that I get, and it's really, really lovely to hear from you guys. If you think you know somebody who might like the pod, share it around. You can watch video versions of the podcast, as well as find clips of the film that I've talked about today on my social media and YouTube pages. If you want to stay connected, just visit my personal blog at www.whatwastthataboutpodcast.com. From there, you can follow me wherever you like. Instagram, Letterboxd, you name it. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you soon.